Hello, good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here at Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart and I'm delighted as always to be joined by somebody to bring a perspective to it that I haven't got in the studio, which is this week it's Maureen Watt, former MSP. Maureen, delighted to have you with us.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And this evening we have our usual array of things. It's a bit of a Friends Reunited kind of theme tonight. We've got protests, enemy, who ain't your friend, finding friends on the continent, media that is very unfriendly, who isn't an Islamabad pal, friendly vaccines for Africa, and finding new friends by bus. So, with that in mind, we start this evening, as we always have done over the last 440 days, by bringing you the Ukrainian update on the illegal Russian war on the state of Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin has told Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine that the whole country is praying for them, as he used his Victory Day speech to defend his invasion of Ukraine. Russia launched about 15 cruise missiles at Ukraine's capital today, with air defence systems shooting all of them down, after air raid alerts blared over most of the country. Serhiy Popko, the head of Kyiv's city military administration, said that according to preliminary information, there were no casualties in the attack that was carried out with cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea region. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner mercenary force which is fighting Russia's battle in Bakhmut, has said he was told that he and his mercenaries would be regarded as traitors if they abandoned their positions after he threatened to withdraw his troops from the city in East Ukraine. Ukraine is planning a very important counter-offensive against Russian forces that must demonstrate success, according to the country's Prime Minister, Denis. Volodymyr Zelensky has said he discussed European integration, defence matters and sanctions against Russia at a meeting with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Kyiv. He said that he expected the European Union to soon approve more sanctions on Russia. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has said there is currently no prospect of peace between Russia and Ukraine because both sides are convinced that they can win. Russia may be building a water pipeline in an attempt to address a water shortage affecting the occupied city of Donetsk. The UK Ministry of Defence said in its daily update that water had been a growing issue for Donetsk since the invasion in February 2022. Members of the European Parliament voted to speed up consideration of a law to boost ammunition production in Europe to the tune of €500 due to efforts to supply Ukraine. Ukraine has received Israeli-made radar defence systems, which have already been deployed in Kyiv as of Monday, according to Israeli media reports. A Lithuanian volunteer organisation, which is known as Blue Yellow, delivered 6 IEMHR models made by Israel's radar electronic industries last week, and 3 are already in use in the Ukrainian capital. Speaking alongside her Chinese counterpart, Qin Gang, at a press conference in Berlin today, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said China could play a decisive role in ending the war in Ukraine. Ukraine's envoy to Japan has called for the leaders of the G7 nations to condemn any threat to use nuclear weapons and vow decisive action against such a move when they hold a summit next week in the city of Hiroshima. Russia has in effect stopped the Black Sea grain deal, which expires on the 18th of May, by refusing to register incoming vessels, Ukraine's reconstruction ministry said. Maureen, in a weekend of pomp and circumstance here, there's been a bit of pomp and circumstance over in the Kremlin. I don't know how much truth there was in the idea that only one tank turned up, but certainly no public were allowed into the parade that celebrated the end of the war with the Nazis. But Putin seemed to be playing to a crowd that he knew well. But was it the first time that we'd heard them talking about the war in Ukraine? Is this a change? The fact that there are people talking about they believe that they can win, it's serious and it's worrying. but the might of Russia seems to be beginning to look a little bit vulnerable, one would hope, given that the public weren't allowed in case there might have been some kind of disruption or whatever. Much a bit like what we had 500 miles south from where we sit.
Well, I'm not sure there's very much of a comparison to be made here, but I think what's happened in Moscow today is very interesting. The fact, as you say, that there was only one tank and it was from the Second World War. No public were allowed in, and those who were just outside Red Square said the whole thing just took 5 minutes to pass them when it was coming out of Red Square. So, and coupled with the fact that many of the normal parades in other cities in Russia had been cancelled. But nevertheless, Putin did use the event to ramp up the special operation in Ukraine to war footing. And given that this time last year it was still a special operation, I think that is very interesting. We've been hearing for weeks now that Ukraine is going to up the ante soon. We're still waiting for that date. Perhaps the missiles over Kyiv today were a portend of what's to come. Maybe that was a preemptive strike by Russia. But the outlook over the next few weeks and months doesn't look good. I was thinking while we're waiting to come on tonight that, the Russian troops have got to get used to so many different types of missiles coming from so many different countries. It must be a nightmare in terms of training and learning how to use all this weaponry that's coming their way from the West. So, I mean, it's almost fingers crossed, but it's worse than that. It's really quite nail-biting, I think, to see what's going to evolve over the next few weeks and months.
And we move from one celebration underneath the Kremlin to anti-coronation protester arrests. And the arrest of 6 participants in the anti-coronation protest in London on Saturday has sparked anger over police conduct and debate around the controversial Public Order Act brought into effect by the government in May this year. Graham Smith, the chief executive of Republic, had been collecting drinks and placards for demonstrators at the main site of the protest on Trafalgar Square 2 hours before the King was due to arrive at Westminster Abbey, when he was stopped along with 5 others by police on nearby St Martin's Lane. The group had been walking behind a rental van containing hundreds of placards when they were approached by the police and searched. The arrests were said to have been made despite a series of meetings and agreements between Republic and Scotland Yard over the demonstration, which was to take place at a point where Whitehall meets the Mall. The Metropolitan Police later released a statement saying that a total of 52 arrests had been made for affray, public order offences, breach of the peace, and conspiracy to cause a public nuisance around the coronation. In this statement, they also stated that the searched van contained items which at the time they had reasonable grounds to believe could be used as lock-on devices, which were later revealed to be luggage straps. UK Policing Minister Chris Philip responded to the arrest today but was unable to justify the Metropolitan Police's decision to hold the 6 protesters in custody for 16 hours following their initial arrest. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and a Home Office official insisted the police are operationally independent of government, with Sunak adding that they make the decisions on the ground in the way they see fit. However, as the Home Office pushed through controversial new powers for police in the Public Order Act days before the coronation, scrutiny and debate around the issue is on the rise. Labour MP and Shadow Secretary of State Lisa Nandy told BBC Breakfast, "Clearly something has gone wrong in this case," later adding in regards to the use of powers under the Public Order Act that it's not clear in this case, she said, whether the problem is with the legislation or whether the problem is more operational and a matter for the police. Meanwhile, SNP MP Joanna Cherry today called for an inquiry into the coronation arrests in London and asked if political pressure was being put on police. In response, Phillips stated that the police reasonably believed there were grounds for the arrest of the 6 protesters and that neither he nor Cherry had all the facts regarding their arrest. The Metropolitan Police expressed regret over the arrests and stated there was no evidence that the protesters were going to attempt to lock on. Maureen, I think the vast majority of people seeing the arrests, which I think were broadcast live in some cases, would be rather concerned that the idea of having the ability to protest is something which is being lost to us.
I think that's absolutely right. And these draconian laws came into force just a week, I understand, before the coronation. So this was the first time that they were being thoroughly tested, and indeed they were thoroughly tested at such a huge event. The law, there's a number of issues in here in this piece, Andrew. I think the laws themselves we knew were absolutely draconian, not something that you expect in a so-called icon of democracy that is supposed to be the UK and the Westminster Parliament. But I also think, to be fair, that the police, the Met, and all the police that were drafted in from other forces throughout the UK were probably on a hiding to nothing at this event. There was such a pressure, I think, from the establishment in its broadest sense to make this event absolutely perfect, and how Britain is supposed to be the only country that can put on shows like this, that there would be absolutely no disruption to it. And they were probably overzealous and over cautious and heavy-handed. It was awful watching demonstrators being carried away, arms and legs. It will be interesting to see what any inquiry into this brings about. But I suspect that a lot of high Hegians are being hypocritical here, saying, oh, well, it was maybe overzealous and heavy-handed, but at the same time had been saying previously, make sure there's absolutely no disruption. I mean, it was awful that women and others handing out anti-attack alarms during the night were arrested. That was totally and utterly nonsensical and without justification. So there are a number of things here that just make you want to weep.
Indeed, and I think that's the issue, isn't it? That what we were about to witness was a demonstration of Britain at its best. That if there was an opportunity to lay out the campaign for retaining its status as a united kingdom, this was potentially it more than almost anything else. And what seems to have happened is that the news item that's coming out is these arrests and this heavy-handedness, and there is almost the feeling for some commentators that there was a very big nervousness over this, that actually it wasn't going to be the showpiece that they thought it was going to be, because they're beginning to feel the mood across the whole of the United Kingdom is not quite as plugged into the establishment as they thought it was.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, if you compare and contrast us with France, for example, which country would you rather live in? One where, notwithstanding the protest is about pensions that are at a much lower age than ours, but not being able to protest in the way that they are able to in France, and able to really influence government by protest. Compare that where protests are being totally and utterly shut down in this country. And, I think I've said it before, that we're probably getting to a stage where campaigns like Just Oil and maybe Republicans, could garner a lot of support on other issues. We've seen recently protests around the Scottish office in Edinburgh. And I think the more people realise that the only way to influence change and get change is to protest, and then to find out that in England that they can't protest without being arrested, really shows just how undemocratic the British state has become.
Indeed, and not to be helpful, here we discover who ain't your friend, as the Labour Party has committed to the refusal to repeal the anti-protest laws. This is following the rising debate that we have just been referring to around the Public Order Act. Labour frontbencher at Westminster Lisa Nandy has today reinforced the party's refusal to get rid of the Conservative government's anti-protest law, claiming that Labour are not in the business of wholesale repeal of legislation. Senior Labour Party member and Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy's comments on not picking through and repealing Conservative government legislation sparked anger within the party, with former MSP Neil Findlay describing Lammy as an idiot for believing that the choice not to repeal the government's anti-protest legislation will help Labour win the next election. SNP MP and Alison Thewlis has commented that by clamping down on the right to protest, the right to strike, and by imposing unnecessary barriers to voting, the Tories are eroding the basic tenets of free and democratic society, adding that the Labour Party was becoming increasingly indistinguishable from the Conservative Party. Maureen, there's a clear, I come to this quite a lot. When Keir Starmer was elected, he made 10 election pledges. Each one of them has been eroded in one way or another. If a fundamental denial to repeal the right to protest, to repeal the right to strike, and I know that Sir Keir Starmer has talked about its different circumstances now, we hadn't had various things happen in the world. One wonders if anybody has ever used that, argument before. It's different circumstances now, maybe we should have, something like a referendum maybe. It is an interesting way to look at it, but the Labour Party have a significant issue, don't they? Because the fact is that the number of people who said, I didn't leave the Labour Party left me, have got the evidence right in front of them once more.
Absolutely. The Labour Party did abandon so many of its members, and maybe that's why they're not prepared to release their membership now. And you can see that Keir Starmer is fixated on those red wall seats in England and getting them back, and thinking, I don't know, appealing to them with the same ideas and the same policies as the Tories. Why would you abandon the blue Tories just for red Tories? It really doesn't make sense, and I cannot for the life of me understand why the Labour Party are not going on a more radical agenda and really standing up for Labour values, or the Labour values that you and I know of the old Labour Party, and trying to convince people that that's the right way for Britain to go, rather than just be a softer version of the very right-wing Tories. I don't get it at all, and I presume they've got access to private polling that says they should be doing what they are doing. But I mean, as so many people say, the people in England really have got no choice these days of what kind of country they want, have they?
No, and one of the things that happened today is that Keir Starmer was asked not once, not twice, and certainly not 3 times, because he ain't no lady, but 7 times to rule out a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. And I know that Nick Clegg at one point, when he was negotiating his coalition deal, talked of being the heart that went into the Conservative Party, or the head that went into the Labour Party, and that was their role. But is this desire to perhaps keep a deal on the table with the Liberal Democrats, a demonstration that Sir Keir Starmer knows he ain't going to be able to depend on Scottish seats to put him into number 10.
Well, I think they're probably right to have ruled out a coalition deal with the Tories. They know where that got them, the Liberal Democrats. I suppose Keir Starmer has got to keep his options open there. But as you see, it looks like they're not as confident as they sometimes make out that they're going to get an outright majority and have to keep their options open. But that kind of just reinforces what I was saying earlier, that in England, voters have no choice, because if the Liberal Democrats are paired to go in with the red Tories, then there is not much difference among any of the parties in England, and maybe that's why parties like the Reform Party, even on the further right, are gaining ground. But I think it does show that a complete move to the right, a dangerous move to the right of Westminster politics, and surely something that Scotland does not countenance, and why, as you say, perhaps Keir Starmer realises that he's not going to be able to count on that many seats from Scotland that he may at one time have thought he was going to get.
Indeed, as politicians decide what choices they have to make, increasingly there are very stark choices being made in homes and houses up and down the country, as 2 million households have been forced to skip on bills. This comes from new analysis from Which, showing that over 2 million UK households missed at least one mortgage, one rent, one loan or one credit card payment last month. The figure is in line with the level seen at the same time last year, but higher than in April 2021, which was 6.5%, and April 2020, the year before, which was 5.2%, marking a downturn from the 8.8% figure reported in March of this year. Bills remain the most common type of missed payment among the population as a whole, with 4.4% failing to pay up. Energy bills are most commonly missed, unsurprisingly, followed by council tax. Mortgage rates have jumped since the UK government's mini-budget in September. The average two-year fix in April 2022 was 2.86%, rising to 5.3% in April 2023. Excuse me, meaning that any homeowner remortgaging will now likely find their monthly bill significantly more expensive. Tenants are also likely to be impacted by these rising mortgage rates if buy-to-let landlords choose to pass on the increased costs. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, found that 1 in 5 tenants in private rented properties it surveyed saw their monthly rent increase 10% or more between February last year and February 2023. Nearly 6 in 10 people had made at least one financial adjustment, such as cutting back on essentials, selling items, or dipping into their savings in the past month to cover essential spending. This potentially equates to an estimated 16.6 million households in the UK. This is consistent with the high adjustment level seen for the past year, but it's much higher than the 35% seen 2 years ago. Now, commenting on these figures, SNP's MP Stewart voiced the Scottish National Party's intentions to hold a potential government that's Labour to account over the cost of living crisis. Maureen, it's tough times, we know that. And people skipping out and paying bills, the energy bills have gone beyond ridiculous. But the idea that this level of compounded debt that ordinary people are going to have to face, and one of the things that I'm aware of is that the rent fee freeze that the SNP government brought in was of great comfort to those in vulnerable housing positions. Surely there's something that the UK government can do, but they may be unwilling to do, but it would be what English voters were looking for the Labour Party to promise to do.
Yes, I think you're right to link that to what we've been discussing before. That it just seems no let up on this really, really dark austerity that the Westminster government is imposing on the citizens of the UK, and no chink, as you might say, in terms of, well, Labour might offer us something better. They're just not at the moment. But, to return to the problem that we've got here, where 2 million people have said they've skipped on bills, that's a figure. But think of the worry that is coupling that. The people who are not sleeping, the people who are possibly going to their doctor to get antidepressants or to get help, at least in Scotland, where we have people in GP surgeries that can maybe direct them to debt advice. As now part of the GP surgery offer in Scotland perhaps helps, and people should be encouraged to seek an early advice on debt and missing bills. But this is just going to increase, is it not? Because people may be using up the little savings that they have to cover bills at the moment, but that's going to run out, and it's just misery heaped on misery, with no, as I say, chink of light at the end of this very dark tunnel that we're in. I mean, I was my husband was speaking to a neighbour yesterday whose granddaughter lives in London and was having to get a new flat, and just for one person the bill, the rent was £2,000 a month, and they wanted 24,000 as a deposit, which is just ridiculous. Now that I don't think is allowed in Scotland. I think it's just 1 month's rent that's required in Scotland. But actually, maybe there's a chink of light with Building Society, the Skipton Building Society, saying that it was going to offer mortgages to first-time buyers without a deposit. I hope that works, and I hope that it catches on with banks and other building societies to see if there is some respite that can be given somewhere in this misery.
Indeed. And it is that compounding, not just of the debt, but of the effect of that debt. And, you're right to point out that we do have debt advisors and GP surgeries in Scotland. And it's understanding that it's not just that I can't afford my bills. It's the worry of not heating. It's the worry of not eating. It's the worry of not being able to clothe my children. It's the worry of not being able to turn them out to school in a way that allows them to be the same as their peers, which means that they're not going to get picked on because they are clothed in a way that perhaps is not going to be at the high end of their children's expectations, and on it goes. Now, when that's happening with the people who are in the lowest income, that's a worry and it's wrong. When it's happening with people who are employed and full-time and in the services like nurses, that is beyond a scandal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And all the while, we should never forget that the rich are getting richer, and that the divide between the wealthy and the poor is increasing all the time. And we're supposed to live in a democratic society, one of the top 10 wealthiest countries in the world, but yet we allow a government to continue to, as I say, let their pals get wealthier, and they don't care how far into the dirt they want to grind the noses of the poor. And the poor, as you say, increasingly being people that you would have thought were in decent jobs like nurses and others, and teachers and others. It is just unbelievable that, going back to an earlier item, that we have got in England especially, parties that offer little choice and little respite from what's going on at the moment.
And we go from the divides that are in the UK to divides that we want to mend, as the SNP, looking to go back to our friends in Europe, has announced that they would demand a close relationship with the European Union in a hung parliament. In the negotiations with a minority Labour government, the Scottish National Party have stated that one of their demands would be that close relationship the UK should have with the European Union. Analysis showing the Scottish National Party could actually hold the balance of power at the next election. This comes from the latest YouGov poll conducted on May the 1st, showing 84% of Scots and 67% of people across the UK think the UK government is handling Brexit poorly, with just 9% of Scots and 22% of people across the UK believing that the government is handling Brexit well. A separate poll conducted by Savanta for ITV Peston between the 28th of April and the 3rd of May found 86% of young people across the UK aged 18 to 25 want to rejoin the European Union. The SNP's EU accession spokesperson Alan Smith MP said that while independence is the only way for Scotland to regain its membership of the European Union, the SNP would seek to, and I quote, undo Brexit as far as possible and secure a close relationship between the UK and the EU in the interim, with single market membership and free movement being key priorities. This statement comes as the UK government is in the process of introducing the Brexit Freedoms Bill, a controversial bill that would see the sunsetting of all retained EU laws, with Scottish Green MSP Mark Ruskell condemning the bill, stating that it put many of the protections and rights that we all rely on at risk, adding that it is not just a failure of statecraft, but an attempt to systematically dismantle the state. I still don't understand why there are not more parties, seeing how terrible Brexit has been, campaigning to go back to the European Union. It's almost as if we've gone so far in this we can't turn back now, because we'd have to admit we were wrong. There seems to be no maturity in certain politicians. But I was listening to something during the course of this week. The mussels, in terms of shellfish, the mussel industry has gone because they can't fish, because they don't meet European standards, because they're now out the EU. And why it is that people aren't sitting saying, well, do you know what? Maybe we should admit our mistake and we're going to campaign to get back in. I'm lost.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that the mainstream media is complicit with the major parties at Westminster in making sure that Brexit isn't mentioned, or is mentioned as little as possible. But, before Brexit, we were in the SNP saying that, certainly in the northeast of Scotland, that people would be £9,000 worse off. We're now sure that it's more than £11,000 per year worse off. And that is a huge amount of money. And, when I'm out knocking on doors and speaking to people, I ask the question about, what they feel about being out of the EU. And the vast majority want to rejoin, but they don't make the connection that if they want to rejoin the EU anytime soon, they're going to have to vote for independence first in order to get that. Because, as you say, Donald, none of the UK parties are going to admit that it was a huge and very costly mistake and lie, a big lie of Brexit, there's no sign whatsoever that anything's going to get any better anytime soon. And, you know, the only answer really is an independent Scotland and an independent Scotland rejoining the EU. I think this has come up today because it is Europe Day, and the SNP wants to highlight its ties still with Europe, and it's the only party in the UK that is talking about wanting to rejoin the European Union. And as I've said many times, the fact that we're out of the European Union is just, to me, the most awful thing. My family have benefited through the Erasmus programme and things like that. My daughter and her fiancé live in France, are now seeking French citizenship, having been there 5 years. That's the kind of country and kind of organisation that I want to be part of. And we've been dragged out as Scots against our will, and I really want back in there.
Absolutely. And to back up the fact that it's Europe Day, of course, it was announced today that funding will continue for the Stay in Scotland campaign, supporting EU citizens to stay in Scotland. The campaign was launched in 2019 with the intention of helping EU citizens understand and secure their rights through the uncertainties presented by Brexit. In partnership with the Citizens' Rights Project, COSLA, and Settled, which is an independent charity helping EU citizens stay in the UK, over £200,000 will help vulnerable people apply to the EU settlement scheme. Commenting on this announcement, Migration Minister Emma Roddick said that Scotland is stronger for its multiculturalism, and our message to EU citizens this Europe Day is clear. You are, and always will be, welcome in Scotland. She added, as we continue to build the case for an independent Scotland within the EU, additional funding for the Stay in Scotland campaign will help ensure EU citizens, particularly those who need assistance with complex applications, get the support they need to gain settled status. Maureen, would it be worthwhile suggesting that that type of migration policy is quite easy to understand, and we wouldn't mind sending a couple of people down to Dover to give them a hand?
Well, there was a big campaign in Scotland to make sure that post-Brexit, we made sure that our European friends knew that we wanted them to stay in Scotland, and urged them to make sure that they did register so that they could remain. I don't know how many people have fallen foul of that. Hopefully not too many, but I remember going around the Polish shops, for example, making sure that they knew, when we were all in shock and still greeting about it, that they were still welcome and not to do anything rash. And obviously, so many were determined to stay here, had made their lives here, even taken relatives over here to stay with them, and, bought houses and everything. Hopefully they've all registered, and we don't see people being forced out of Scotland because they've not registered. And I'm glad that we are still putting money and finance into a scheme to make sure that everyone who needs to has registered.
And we go from making people welcome from a friendly part of the country to an unfriendly media organ, as Ofcom has found that GB News was in breach of broadcasting rules for a second time. An Ofcom investigation has today found the Mark Stein programme, which first aired on GB News on the 4th of October 2022, in breach of broadcasting rules. The programme included an interview between presenter Mark Stein and a guest, Dr. Naomi Wolf. During the interview, Naomi Wolf made serious claims about the COVID-19 vaccine, including that its rollout amounted to a premeditated crime, in quotations, mass murder, and was comparable to the actions of, and I'm quoting, doctors in pre-Nazi Germany. Ofcom received 422 complaints that alleged these comments were dangerous and included misinformation that went unopposed. In line with the right to freedom of expression, broadcasters are free to transmit programmes that include controversial and challenging views. However, the Broadcasting Code imposes a clear requirement that if such content has the potential to be harmful, the broadcaster must ensure that its audience is adequately protected. Ofcom's investigation concluded that GB News had fallen short of this requirement by allowing Naomi Wolf to promote a serious conspiracy theory without challenge or context. There was also no scrutiny of the evidence she claimed to hold to support her claims. Ofcom further stated that because the programme presented Naomi Wolf as a figure of authority with particular knowledge and expertise in the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines, this would have lent credibility to her unchallenged claims. Of particular concern was her significant and alarming claim that mass murder was taking place through the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccinations, which she repeated 3 times. It was found that the comments made by Naomi Wolf had the potential to impact viewers' decisions about their health and were therefore potentially harmful. And because GB News did not take adequate steps to protect viewers from this potentially harmful content, Ofcom found the channel in breach of Rule 2.1 of the Broadcasting Code. This is the second significant breach of the code recorded against GB News. Because of this, Ofcom has requested that GB News attend a meeting to discuss its approach to compliance. Well, Maureen, what a surprise that GB News is found to have fallen foul of being impartial and potentially peddling some kind of conspiracy theory or nonsense which is likely to affect the health of the nation. It doesn't come as much of a surprise, really, does it?
Absolutely not. I mean, sometimes you come across it when you're flicking through the channels, and it's just outrageous, some of the stuff that some of the presenters and commentators that they have on come out with. I mean, it's like Fox News, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But Donald, you know about this. I mean, they've been found in breach, but of the rules. But are they then subject to a fine? Because it strikes me that the only way to stop these lies that are perpetrated by broadcasters like this is to fine them until they go out of business. So are they then subject to a fine if they're found to have breached the law? Were they last time?
I think
what happens?
Well, I think that what will happen is, I don't know if you remember, many years ago they used to say you would be able to spot the social work wains because they had flat heads and bad teeth, because every time they did something naughty, these social workers would pat them in the head, give them a sweetie and tell them not to do it again. Well, this is the corporate equivalent. What they've been told is to come in, to tell tell Ofcom about their compliance procedures, and then if that is found to be okay, keep going. I think that it needs more than a fine. I think what it needs is I think it needs to be taken off air. And the thing, of course, is that this is number 2. Number 3 is on its way. And of course, there are other broadcasters as well as them who have been clearly in breach of Ofcom rules time and time again in terms of impartiality, including having MPs who would interview other MPs and suggest that this was some form of impartiality, some kind of analysis of the politics of the day, whether it be the budget or anything else, which is just basically them telling you a new party political broadcast under the banner of something else. So the answer is, I would imagine they're not going to get fined. They are going to be asked to account. But the question becomes, if there's a third one in the pipeline, is this meeting going to say that if you have been discovered that what you've told us is a lie, that you are finally going to get fined? Who are the backers of GB News? What can they afford in terms of fines?
I don't know, but it does seem to show that Ofcom's pretty toothless then. I mean, I don't mind people expressing their views, whatever they are, but surely you have to you have to be truthful in what you say. And if nobody is fact checking rigorously, which surely a body like Ofcom should be doing, then, as you say, these little cozy chats between the ERG and their pals on channels like GB News is just another propaganda machine for the far right that's going about it completely unchecked. And that, to me, should be pretty worrying. I mean, not everybody's like you and me, kind of news junkies who perhaps look at different outlets to find our news, um, and can recognize a lie and an untruth when they see it. Um, but yeah, this isn't just another move of not just the government and Westminster, but also the broadcasting media moving further to the right, unchecked.
Indeed, and we move from there to disturbing news in many ways, as Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been arrested in Islamabad. Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, arrested, a government minister has said, as supporters of the politician are told to shut down Pakistan. Mr. Khan is said to have appeared in court in Islamabad on corruption charges, with a charge sheet stating that Mr. Khan is accused of commission of the offence of corruption and corrupt practices under Section 9A of the National Accountability Ordinance. Footage which has appeared online, shows Mr. Khan being led into an armoured vehicle by security forces. Officials from Mr. Khan's Tehreek-e-Insaf party said he is in the custody of the security forces, adding that they have complained to the Islamabad High Court, which has now requested a police report about the detention. Speaking anonymously to the Associated Press, anti-corruption officials said Pakistan's National Accountability Bureau had put out a warrant for Mr. Khan's arrest last week in a separate case, but he had not obtained bail. They added that Mr. Khan will appear before a tribunal later today. The former leader appeared to record the video from an unknown location this morning, with a caption saying officials were out for his arrest to prevent him from campaigning. Mr. Khan was moved to Rawalpindi near Islamabad, where he was questioned by police and underwent a medical checkup before his tribunal. The 72-year-old was ousted from power last year and has spent his time campaigning against his successor, claiming that his removal was illegal. Maureen, I saw some of this online. There seemed to be a large number. One would all actually wonder whether Police Scotland had moved them from somewhere in the south side of Glasgow over to Islamabad. The numbers were so huge of police officers taking Imran Khan into custody. But the Indian subcontinent is a bit of a worry with Modi and the contact with Russia and the connections that are there. And now I know that Khan had been very vocal in his campaigning against corruption within Pakistan, but this seems to be quite a draconian move.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it is worrying that places like Pakistan and India are following the Russian model of get rid of your opponents by charging them with corruption. And I'm old enough to remember Imran Khan when he was the dishy cricketer. But I really don't know enough about Pakistani politics to know exactly what's going on. I'm presuming that he isn't guilty of corruption, but you never know if somebody has been corrupted along the way in their political life. So I really don't feel that qualified to comment on what this is, but it's maybe interesting to see what happens, whether it is a government in power nervous about whether they have a base for their support, and if there were free and fair elections, whether the opposition led by Imran Khan would come back into power and curb their wings while they're corrupt. You just don't know unless you really know what's going on on the ground in Pakistan's politics, I don't think.
Indeed, and going from someone who may feel friendless to the Scottish Government attempting to get us not to get on our bike, but to choose the bus in order potentially to find more connections out there. As new Scottish Government Choose the Bus campaign has been launched with Transport Minister Kevin Stewart visiting Galashiels Transport Interchange this very day to mark the second phase of the government partnership campaign with the bus industry. The Choose the Bus campaign aims to highlight the financial, environmental benefits and convenience of bus travel, with the goal of getting more people to choose bus travel more often. Co-funded by the Scottish Government and Confederation of Passenger Transport, the CPT, the £300,000 campaign runs over 2 phases until May 31st, 2023, and is being delivered across digital, social channels, radio, TV, out-of-home advertising, print and digital press. The campaign more specifically targets over 60s, as travel data indicates that they appear more reluctant than some other parts of the population to return to using the bus. Minister for Transport Kevin Stewart said that the restrictions of the pandemic had a significant effect on people's travel behaviours, and it's clear the transport sector still has not fully recovered to pre-pandemic levels of patronage. That's why this campaign is an important positive step in supporting the bus industry towards recovery. We want to encourage as many people as possible to choose the bus more often. Paul White, Director of CPT Scotland, also commented on the campaign, saying, "CPT Scotland and our members are delighted to have delivered the Choose the Bus campaign with Transport Scotland." Maureen, I suppose my interest is not just about getting more people on the bus, which is more economical, it's more environmentally friendly. It's also dealing with the large numbers of people who will use the bus tend not to be the high earners. They tend to be, and particularly in rural areas and areas that are slightly out from the major conurbations. And that's massively important. But there's also another issue in there, I feel, which is about who owns the buses, and whether we need to look more proactively, a bit like what Lothian buses are, and being publicly owned.
Yes, and I think in the last transport bill, local authorities have been given the opportunity to bring the local bus companies into their ownership if they want, but of course they haven't, under present circumstances, got the money to do that. But I'm glad to see that there is a focus on buses, because, as you said, Donald, it tends to be the middle class that are more likely to use trains, and poorer folk use the buses to get to and from work. And the Scottish Government does support the bus industry through the senior citizens, your bus pass for senior citizens. It's still for over 60s, although you don't retire now till 66. And recently the under 25s getting free travel as well as veterans and folk with disabilities and their carers. So I think, there is a move towards more control of the buses, and not everybody benefits from the low standardised fares of Lothian buses, which is a great example of what can be done. So it is good to see the government supporting choose your bus, because I think that can only be good in the long term.
Indeed, and as we always do, we like to leave you with something there's a little bit uplifting, and today it's been announced that funding for life-saving vaccine research in Zambia is, it was announced, a state-of-the-art research laboratory is to be established in Zambia due in part to £1 million of Scottish Government investment for international development. First Minister Humza Yusuf confirmed the funding following a meeting with the President of the Republic of Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema, alongside a delegation from the Zambian government at Panmure House in Edinburgh. Scotland, of course, has a long-standing partnership with Zambia, with a joint commitment to collaborate in key areas, now to include health, through tackling the burden of non-communicable diseases. The new facility, hosted by the University of Zambia, will support life-saving research and increase access to vaccines in the country. This extends existing Scottish Government support for the Blantyre partnership between the University of Glasgow and Kamuzu University of Health Science in Malawi. It will create a groundbreaking three-country collaboration in scientific research between the universities in Scotland, Malawi and Zambia. The First Minister said that the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of countries working together across continents to jointly tackle global health challenges. This initiative, led by Zambian and Malawian expertise with Scottish Government support, will improve health outcomes in these countries as well as produce research that will contribute to global good. Commenting on the investment, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema, said, "Zambia's partnership with Scotland goes back many years, and we welcome the opportunity to refresh and renew this historic friendship." The delegation from Zambia also includes the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Education, and the Minister of Finance and National Planning. Maureen, it's not just the pandemic, the Ebola virus, there's lots of examples of really good international collaboration. And I think with COP26, where we were the first country to say we'll put cash in order to help poorer countries out, that there is real benefit for everybody, not just for the countries who are going to benefit initially from it, but as is mentioned there, global support that could help throughout the world. And it's vitally important.
Absolutely. I was kind of laughing because the African countries do like their big delegations when they go anywhere. But to be serious, this is really good. And it just shows that the commitment of Scotland, still not an independent country, but a devolved administration, committed to 1.7% of its budget to international development, and it is international development. It's not used for other things like paying for refugees and things, which is happening with Westminster's overseas budget, which you don't know where it's exactly going these days. This is a real example of Scotland's commitment to the countries that it does have partnerships, Zambia, Malawi, Pakistan, and I think maybe one other, actually having real tangible benefits, helping the medical schools there at the same time as having vaccine research. And we know that while the outbreak has been of COVID has been downgraded, there are still vast tracts of the African subcontinent where people have not been vaccinated at all, and that it is still raging around. So this is a really good news story to finish off with.
Indeed. And as it is the last one, thank you very much, Maureen, as always, for joining us and giving you your insight. And that is it for this evening. But before we go, there's a couple of things. First of all, we're hearing that there is a jury verdict over in America right now about to come in terms of Donald Trump rape trial, which of course is a civil case which is across the pond, while he has been trying to deflect himself by visiting parts of the world where one may even suggest that he might not be as welcome here as elsewhere. But before I go and while we wait for that to come through to us, I just wanted to remind you, now, this is possibly the point where you switch off and you go and you do something else. Stay with me, because it's important. I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we kind of depend on you. We depend on you by your generosity. Our supporters who have donated and signed up to make a regular monthly payment, and on behalf of everybody here, all of the volunteers who are in on a consistent basis, thank you very much. Your support is very much appreciated. If you're on social media and you see our tweets or you see anything on Instagram or Facebook or whatever that you can send out to increase our audience share, please do that as well, because our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target, an ambitious target, of adding 10,000. Why set a target if it's not going to be ambitious? This is to enable us to employ more staff and employ staff to make more programmes. So that what we want to do is to establish the opportunity that whilst I'm sitting waiting to hear if Donald Trump's rape trial has come in with a verdict, that we can continue to broadcast and have the opportunity to bring you news stories that have a particular Scottish slant and you might not be getting from other media sources. So with the possibility hanging above us that the Trump trial is just going to beat us to the punch, from tonight, from me, Donald C. Stewart, and Maureen Watt, who has been with me all tonight, it is good night and thank you for watching.